We've had everybody waited enough, and for the entertainment session is now over. The official webinar begins. I'm pleased to be here today with Mickey Osterreicher with NPPA, and of course our facilitator Mike O'Shea from the FAA. And today we're going to talk about media, drones, law enforcement, news gathering. They'll tell you about what's going to come up next. Anyway, just a couple updates from drone responders. Again, we want to thank our top patrons for supporting these webinars and others. That would be DJI, Skydio, and New Air. And we want to let you know that drone responders has just now gone over 4,300 members. That's 4,300 members. And we have our map up that we have now got over 400 agencies. And for you to put your map on, it's teams.droneresponders.org. It takes 3 minutes, literally 3 minutes, maybe even quicker if you're a fast typer. But you'll be able to see information about your department, other agencies, and then we have a dashboard filter coming. But of course, the dashboard filter won't be important to you unless you're in it. So get in it. With that, we're ready to move into today's session, and I'm going to turn it over to Mike O'Shea. Mike.
Hey everybody, welcome to the monthly webinar. Just a couple of things, I don't know if I call them housekeeping or just issues that have arose over the past month. Still having some issues with people taking the wrong course when they take the recurrent training. I think we've labeled it pretty well, but in case we haven't, and you got to understand we're an aviation governmental agency, and we don't speak sometimes very well to people who are not in the aviation world. And so people are taking the Part 61 recurrent training, but Part 61 means manned aviation. So if you're a manned aviation pilot, that would be the test you would take. But if you're not, you need to take ALC 677, which is for non-Part 61 pilots or non-manned aviation pilots who are basically the 107 pilots. So forget anything we say or tell you, all right, but take the ALC 677 and you'll have taken the correct test. There have been a couple other issues that have popped up. One is not so much in public safety, but in general, we've seen associations post information saying that the FAA has just now allowed everybody to fly at night over people and over moving vehicles. That was a little surprise to us when we saw some of those posts, because that's all they said. There was no qualifiers that said, if you have an aircraft that meets the means of compliance, one of these categories for operations over people, and if you have the lighting and take the recurrent training, all that other stuff. None of that was in that. So we're currently working with some of these associations to hopefully have them put out the correct information. And just so you know, there's a little bit of confusion for public safety. I heard someone say, well, now we can fly over, people and moving vehicles. And you need to know that the date that this all started, April 21st, was the start of that process to get to that point. And that's based on different categories that drones will meet a basic means of a compliance for. And right now, there are currently no drones on the list, as of yesterday anyway, I checked, that have met the means of compliance to operate over people or under those conditions. The other thing you need to remember is the rule says that you're supposed to have remote ID enacted to operate over people as well. So even if you're operating for recreational purposes, you're going to have remote ID if you want to operate over people. And I should clarify that statement, but and make sure that I can provide more information on that in the future. But that was part of a discussion we had today. And then that's pretty much the only issues that have arisen. If you guys have further questions about what's going on, we can certainly answer that. Today and tomorrow, we have sorry, I keep getting text messages here. We have the FAA Symposium, Session 3. Will be followed up by Session 4 in September, but there are public safety panels. Today, there was a panel that was hosted by Charles Werner, talking about fire operations and drone operations, and they had people from Ohio and FDNY and Los Angeles Fire Department talking about some of the missions they've done and how they've used drones, and also provided some information, essentially some lessons learned. Tomorrow, we'll have additional panels. One panel will be on disaster response, and it'll be basically the folks out of Texas that have put together sort of a disaster response team for their entire state with unmanned aircraft systems. And then we'll also have a panel from the FAA on FAA resources that I'll moderate. That'll have Carrie Fleming, who, if you've attended these before, is the manager of the Systems Operations Support Center that issues the special governmental interests or emergency authorizations to fly, and also issues temporary flight restrictions. And then also with Carrie will be Scott Harris, and Scott Harris is a special agent with our Law Enforcement Assistance Program, which is the entity that supports public safety with their investigative, as an investigative resource, and also sort of an informational resource for anything dealing with aviation, just not unmanned aircraft systems. I always forget that because I only do UAS, but they do a lot of work with agencies that say, I'm working midnights. We have a small airport in our city, and these airplanes keep landing late at night. I wonder what they're doing. I wonder what we could do about that. And that's the kind of stuff that they can provide assistance and training to figure out what's going on, to make sure those are perfectly legal operations. And if they're not, how you can take the next step to deal with that. So I highly encourage you to reach out to your LEAP agent, whether you're fire, emergency management, or law enforcement. Just make that contact, have that person in your Rolodex. I probably have to explain what a Rolodex is to the young people. It used to be a thing you turn and it had people's names on it, but now it's all electronic. But to put them in your contacts, and then you can reach out to them if you have an issue. And I always encourage people to make an invite to your regional LEAP agent, to stop by your agency, to see what your program, to see what you're doing with the UAS. And that's kind of the best way to build relationships. I'm a firm believer in the fact that the federal government is, it's this mass, there's big government, and nobody seems to know who big government is, but it's really people like me. And I know if I, back in my day when I was a police officer, if somebody said I had to reach out to the FAA to ask questions, I'd be like, who do I call? I wouldn't even know. But so part of what we try to do is to make sure we sort of provide the face of the FAA. Probably shouldn't be mine, but that we sort of be a resource for you and someplace you can call. And I always tell people I don't know all the answers. I really don't know all the answers, but I probably know the people who do, and I'm happy to work with you to help you with your operation, answer your questions, or whatever it takes for you to have a successful UAS program. So today we're going to talk about working with the media. We're going to talk about some positive things that work with the media, and we're going to talk about some negative things that have happened when we've had interactions between law enforcement and the media. And I want to go ahead and invite Mickey. Mickey, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background and what you do?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. You'd almost think that we kind of actually rehearsed this before, because one of the things I was going to say was, can you fill some people in on some of the things exactly what you just did? So thank you for doing that. So I've been on the advisory panel of drone responders. I'm the general counsel of the National Press Photographers Association. Before going to law school, which I did later in life, I was a photojournalist in both print and broadcast for about 40 years. And I've been a uniform reserve sheriff's deputy with the Erie County Sheriff's Office since 1976 as well. So I understand the challenges of law enforcement, but I think I also understand the challenges of news gathering. And we got involved, NPPA got involved in news gathering many years ago in terms of use of drones for news gathering, because I see that as the next natural progression of photographing and recording. I mean, obviously aerial photography has been around for quite a long time, but it was pretty much only the big TV stations that could afford a helicopter or a fixed wing aircraft to do that. And certainly the use of drones is now leveling the playing field for individual journalists, for freelance journalists, but also for news organizations. Obviously Bell Jet Rangers are very expensive to operate, to own, to lease. They're also not as necessarily safe as the use of a drone. So I think we see more and more of those happening. Charles knows that for 4 years now, we've done a drone journalism leadership summit where we've brought together members of the FAA, DHS, law enforcement, fire, public safety, and the leaders of the major drone programs in the United States, Gannett, CNN, Sinclair. And really, we're trying I've been a strong advocate all along of, obviously, just like Mike, having conversations. Don't wait until the you know what hits the fan to then try and, oh, who's doing what are we doing? And what's nice in terms of what I see drones as is this catalyst for bringing the news media and law enforcement together to have this common discussion. Because where I think in the past and still currently, it's, oh no, the media is here. Oh, what do we do now? Well, like, just like everybody knows, the sun comes up in the east. If there's going to be an event that's newsworthy, media is going to show up eventually. So like oh my God, the media is here, what do we do? Is kind of like being surprised that the sun came up that day. So again, I think it's really important for the news media as well to reach out to law enforcement, because when you're flying your drone, the first person that you're going to meet is not going to be somebody from the FAA or the NTSB. It's going to be your local law enforcement who got some complaint or some call through their dispatch to say somebody's flying a drone. And wouldn't it be better if you had told them ahead of time, if indeed you weren't doing something, that was an investigative report where you didn't want somebody to fly, but you're just getting, locators, a beauty shot, whatever. Hey, this is so-and-so. You've already established a relationship with your local law enforcement. Hi, this is so-and-so from WABC. We're going to be flying at 11 a.m. today at Main and Broad. We're going to be up for about 10 minutes if you get any calls. And so when Grandma Smith calls and says, there's a drone up in the air. Yes, Mrs. Smith, we know it's WABC. They'll be there about 10 minutes, and they don't even have to send the car, as opposed to you're out there and now an officer who may or may not know anything about drones, may not have a LEAP card, may not even know what LEAP is now going to act like they know everything there is to know about drones and whether you can or can't fly. And, it usually doesn't end well because they got the badge and they got the gun. And at that point, the journalist is probably going to lose the argument. Later on, the taxpayers may end up paying for that small victory. So it's with that frame of mind that I thought I've been listening to these. As I said, I've been on the Drone Responders Advisory Board kind of since the very beginning, and met Charles. And again, think that we really need to have these conversations. So I've been listening to Mike, and I think he's been great. And I've learned a lot, and listening to others in law enforcement. But I thought, okay, this is really good. Maybe we can have a conversation that I want. And of course, asking Charles and Mike, they thought, absolutely, let's do it. So here we are. As it turned out, it's like, cue the incident. We just had one over the weekend in St. Cloud, Minnesota, where this journalist, who's a Part 107, was flying in Class G airspace. There was, it was my understanding, at least, a murder investigation. He was flying in airspace that he was allowed to. He made sure not to fly exactly over the scene, was pretty much done flying when he got approached by law enforcement, who ended up seizing his drone. Eventually, I think they when he talked to the town prosecutor or the counsel for the law enforcement agency, they said, yeah, come pick up your drone. Well, that's all well and good, but I think, what was nice is that I was able to reach out to Mike. He was able to contact people in the FAA. We still don't know what the resolution is, but at least, I thought this was a really good example of how responsive the FAA wants to be, in terms of, it is a two-way street. They want to explain to law enforcement what they should be doing, but also possibly to avoid things that they shouldn't be doing. So, Mike, you want to talk maybe a little bit more about
Sure.
that?
And I think it's important that that it's not the FAA's role or responsibility to get in, whether or not you're violating somebody's Fourth Amendment rights. That's really not our thing. What our thing is sort of to educate public safety on what are the rules and regulations regarding flying in the national airspace. And if you take some action that violates those rules, and if you're liable for a lawsuit from whatever entity, that's nothing to do with the FAA. But I think it's important that you hear some of these stories. And I know the people on this call are probably the best people to know what's going on. I mean, you're the ones who know the rules. You're flying UAS. You probably know what you can and can't do with the UAS. You know what is illegal and an illegal operation. But the issue is there's probably people on your agency or your department who don't know the rules. And it sort of behooves you to educate them. One, to make sure that, your agency is not liable for taking an unlawful action. But two, because that'll make them better informed when they get an illegal operation as to what to do. And I can tell you from my experience, from watching people fly drones in the National Capital Region area, where there is places you can legally operate and there are places where it's illegal to operate. I've seen both stances from public safety. I've seen, public safety stand there and watch someone fly a drone illegally because they don't know the rules and just kind of go, hey, that's pretty cool, as they fly over large crowds of people in restricted airspace. And then I've seen sort of the opposite, where people are confronted, for flying a drone when they're perfectly legal. And I think it's an education thing. I mean, to me, it always boils down to education, that we probably need to do a better job of reaching out and letting people know, what is a legal operation? What is an illegal operation? How do you make an approach to whether it's somebody from the media or somebody who's just out flying for fun, and to make sure that, that what they're doing is legal, that you don't harass them to the point where they wreck the drone and make you liable for it. And then kind of the same thing, we need to sort of work with operators to know that if you're approached by public safety, you should let them know the following things. You should let them know that, this is I'm working for the Acme Real Estate Company and I'm flying legally, and if I'm in controlled airspace, I have a LANCE authorization or I have a waiver that allows this operation. And I don't know if you guys realize, with the new rule that passed, one of the things that was added was, you always have the ability to ask to see somebody's registration. You have the ability to ask to see if somebody has a waiver, because all the waivers we issue say you must present to public law enforcement upon request. But we didn't have the ability to ask for the remote pilot certificate. For some reason, it just didn't follow over from Part 91 when we created Part 107. But now we do have that ability, and it goes a little farther. Not only do I have to show you my remote pilot certificate, but I have to show you a photo ID so you can verify that that photo is me and that name on my photo ID matches the name that's on that remote pilot certificate. So they're required to show you that under federal law. The issue, and the one that I don't know the answer to, and you're going to have to talk with your city attorney, your county attorney, your state's attorney, is if you ask for that information and they tell you to pound sand, what can you do? Is that interfering with a lawful investigation? It really depends, because you're using a federal law for the right to ask for that information. And I'm not an attorney. Mickey is. I didn't sleep in a Holiday Inn last night. But there's some things out there you need to figure out on your own. But let's get into some of these situations that Mickey was talking about. The first time this kind of popped up or reared its became an issue is we had a large news gathering organization, a national news gathering organization, that called the local police department and said, hey, we're going to be in your city. We're going to film, with a drone at this location at this time. And the city said, no, you're not. And they try to say, well, we're not asking your permission. We're just being polite, informing you're going to fly. And they go, you can't fly there. So the issue is one, obviously at a local, state, or county level, you don't grant or deny permission for people to fly unless you have some kind of statute that says, you can't launch from a city park or city property, that kind of stuff. And the second thing is, when you have a news media gathering organization, they have the First Amendment right to gather the news. So you definitely don't want to get between yourself and violating somebody's rights. And whether that is or isn't, like I said, that's really for you to work out with your general counsel and make that decision. That's not a Mike O'Shea thing. And like, again, I said, I'm not an attorney, didn't sleep in a Holiday Inn last night. But you need to figure that out now. But the real issue here is we need to work, we meaning public safety, you know, fire, police, emergency management, and all the associations that are that are around those entities need to inform our members, you know, what is illegal, what is an illegal operation, what you can and what you can't do. And that's sort of where I think the FAA's role is to sort of come in and provide that information, so that information can be provided on to those associations members or to the general public, law enforcement, fire, EMS, emergency management that's listening to these type of presentations, so they know that. And like I said, everybody on this call, I'm sure, probably knows enough about UAS and UAS operations not to go out and seize a drone where it's a legal operation. And then, but it's probably not you. It's probably somebody in your agency that doesn't know. And you know, I'm probably telling you something you probably already know. You need to work within your agency to make sure that you have programs that tell people what is a legal and illegal operation, so they can take the right and correct actions to deal with those operations. Mickey, you want to talk about some of the other examples?
Yeah, well, we just had another one that came up on one of the boards where people post things, and a Part 107 pilot was flying from near his home in airspace where he was allowed to fly, and his next door neighbor took issue with that, went after him, you know, grabbed the controller. Somehow the drone did return to home, but ended up crashing. This is my understanding, the neighbor went off with the controller and the broken drone. The Part 107 pilot called the police. The officer showed up and said, take it up with the FAA, and basically, you know, forget assault, forget, you know, damage property, forget all of these local ordinances that were violated. It's like all of a sudden it's like, I don't want to deal with this, it involves a drone. So I'm sure you're hearing those kinds of stories as well.
Yeah, and you definitely need to know that there are most of these cases, there's local statute or, you know, or state or county or home rule resolutions that you can take action upon. And that one's really obvious. I mean, the guy definitely assaulted somebody and took the property. I know where I live, that would be, you know, aggravated robbery, because he, you know, used force to take something from somebody. And the guy should have been arrested for a felony, but I don't know where this event occurred or why they did or didn't take action. But that's the kind of stuff that you know, probably working with the associations, we need to do a better job of letting people know what they can do, what they can't do, the actions they can take on their own. I mean, I think some people forget, you know, they basically see or, you know, hear that there's a drone involved, and they automatically say they either do two things. One is, you know, we can overdo the action that we take against these, or we'll do nothing because everything in the air belongs to the FAA. Well, that's not true. I mean, that we control the airspace and operations in that airspace, but the action that occurred on the ground, we're a regulatory agency. We're not a law enforcement agency. The battery and assault that occurred, that is not a FAA thing. We don't, I mean, all we do is fine people or take their license away. But we're not a criminal, a law enforcement agency. We don't make arrests. We don't do criminal investigations. We do civil investigations. And that usually leads to either telling people not to do that again or fining them because it's egregious enough that we need to make sort of a point. So it's really important that I think we start sitting down, you know, probably, you know, with the associations and start talking about, you know, what do you do? Because it's not like drones are going to go away. I mean, we're not going to have less drones in the future. You know, the numbers all say that the number of drones are going to, you know, increase significantly. And we've tried to do some work, you know, we've created guides, you know, like the drone responder playbook, that drone response playbook. I guess, sorry, I don't want to steal your name, Charles. But that has information about what you can do, what actions you can take. And also, you know, what does a license look like? This guide is actually designed not for the UAS pilot who knows the rules, but for that law enforcement officer who doesn't know the rules. And it's probably important, if I was an operator operating a drone and not in public safety, would behoove me to sort of download this. So, when I get approached and someone says, well, I think I'm gonna take your drone. So what, you probably need to know the rules, and here they are. But it's, like I said, I've been saying this for years about everything that in public safety, it's probably an education issue, and we need to do a better job. And I think we need to sort of come together, I'm not in public safety anymore, but if I was, I would be really concerned about the liability involved with my officers taking actions that are not legal. Because it pretty much means that we're going to turn around and get sued, and then the taxpayers are going to write checks, and they're just not going to be happy about it. Plus, depending on the action you take, I mean, if well, I don't want to get into that. Again, I'm not an attorney. I'm not playing an attorney, and I didn't sleep on a holiday in last night. Becky?
Mike, so this one is probably a little more touchy, but I'm sure, you can at least talk about it. So there are certain agencies that are authorized under some of the new rules to take action, like the Department of Energy, the Department of Defense, to take action against a drone. I mean, Charles is always talking about the careless, the clueless, and the criminal, and trying to figure out which one it is. But if there comes a point that somebody determines that a drone is being used in a way that it shouldn't, and it's in danger, there's some imminent danger, there are only certain agencies that can take action. Unfortunately, we've seen a lot of people, whether it's both law enforcement or public safety or just individual citizens, who have exercised what's better known as self-help, and have used, such things as nets and fire hoses and baseballs and other things to take drones out of the sky. And, at least it's my understanding that because the FAA wanted that authority, they've classified drones as aircraft. And there are certain federal rules against tampering with the flight of an aircraft. And again, it's my understanding that the drone falls under those rules, just like the FAA takes very seriously anybody that points a laser at a cockpit of a landing or taking off, of a plane taking off. That's a very serious thing. Unfortunately, and I realize you guys don't have bandwidth, you're not everywhere, but, I think we found that just, in those situations, that when people do exercise that self-help and might, just like drone operators, be subject to fines, that the people doing things to drones don't necessarily get looked at by the FAA in the same way. And so can you talk about that, maybe how that's going to develop or change, or what somebody to do when their drone, when they're flying legally, gets interfered with in that way?
So the taking down of an aircraft or interfering with the operation of an aircraft is believe it or not, not an FAA violation. It's a 18 USC 32, which is just a federal violation. So definitely you want to call your local FBI field office. If you're public safety and you take a report of that, you certainly want to share that report with your local field office, because those are the ones who can take action, because that's a criminal procedure, not a civil. And like I told you before, the FAA, we only do civil, we don't do criminal. So it's important that you contact them and reach out to them. When you're talking about counter-UAS and who has the authorities, right now it's really delegated just to the federal government. It's delegated to the Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Defense, and Department of Energy have the authorities. One of the FAA's involvement in that is to ensure that those actions don't interfere with normal operations in the national airspace. We have had some examples. We had a public safety agency purchase a counter-UAS system that was an active GPS denial system, and they wanted to operate that at a very busy port that was right next to an international airport. And obviously that's a good example of something that would interfere with normal operations in the national airspace. Not to mention, because almost every aircraft that flies now uses GPS for going from vector points or wherever to approach and departure of a runway. Not to mention that in this active port, most of these ships were using GPS, to transit in and out. Not to mention the recreational folks that are out there boating that were using GPS as well. So that's kind of our role in this. And then working with the federal agencies that are testing counter-UAS systems that'll eventually be used at airports, and then other areas, critical infrastructure and that kind of stuff. But really, if somebody illegally takes down a drone, for whatever reason, the federal violation 18 U.S.C. 32 is a criminal violation, and it needs to be handled criminally. And that has to either be done by, like I said, by one of the federal law enforcement agencies, such as the FBI or DHS, or it can be done by the Department of Transportation's Inspector General's office if they get involved in it, because they're law enforcement.
Charles, I know we've talked about this a lot. What kinds of advice have you been giving? And I obviously, I think today we've got a mix of journalists and public safety on this call. So it's nice that we're able to speak to both groups. But, I know that we've worked together to try and, again, start that conversation going between the groups. What have you been seeing? I think another thing that's really important for law enforcement is, and we've talked about this as well, that they're out there trying to get their programs off the ground, literally and figuratively, the public safety drone programs. And the best way we've seen to do that is obviously to get buy-in from your community. And the best way to get buy-in is getting stories out there that are positive stories of a drone being used to find somebody in 10 minutes, where it might take searchers dozens and dozens of searchers hours and hours to find them. So I would love for you to kind of maybe relate some of those stories, because again, that's a perfect way to start that conversation between the media and law enforcement, public safety. I mean, that's the other thing is I think it's starting to change as you're seeing your numbers grow, but for the longest time, media probably had more drones than public safety did. And there were a lot of public safety departments looking at the media saying, oh, can we use that? Or can we see what your drone sees? Or, those kinds of things, but they're developing their own programs. But I'm just looking at ways for people to, as they say, just get along here. So, because I think that's so important. And I'd love for you to talk about that a little bit.
Sure. I think that there's a couple different aspects. So one, you have the situation with local media. And then you have the situation with media from outside the community that comes in. So for those that are in the local community, what we recommend, both on the public safety side and on the media side, is to try to develop a relationship, have a conversation in advance, to share roles and responsibilities. When an incident occurs, how can we best work together? On the panel earlier today, LA City Fire Assistant Chief Rich Fields was really great at saying, we have a phenomenal relationship with the media. And it's a two-way street of benefits, is that we, when we can, if we can provide them video footage, we will. So we have certain things in access, and we're there early on, so we've caught some things. And at the same time, they've had situations where the media has been in a better situation to get some footage that they otherwise wouldn't have. So I think that, it's the first step is all about relationships, when you can establish them. The other thing that I think is important is, as Mike mentioned, there is information on the FAA website, and there's information in Drone Responders about how to be dealing with drone situations. And I think that it would be good on both sides for the law enforcement to have those documents and the LEAP card and the information that gives the advice, but also for the media to go there and understand what's there as resources and have some of those things with them, so that they can hand it, as Mike was saying, to the police officer who may not know. The third equation here that we haven't talked about, which is kind of important, is that a lot of this starts from the call that's received to the 911 or the public safety answering point. So the first call comes into a dispatcher. And so here we have a dispatcher who's probably even more far removed from any understanding of drones than even the police officers. So I know, and Mike, I don't know if you can shed any light on this or not. I know there was a friend of mine, John Abbey, was working on a program called Safe Flight. And the idea there was to create a tool that would be for dispatchers and communicators that would give kind of a question answer type thing to ask the caller when they say, oh, we got a drone flying over here. They could ask, what's the drone doing? Was it flying over people? Is it just a couple of different things that would narrow it down to whether action needed, dispatch police unit or not? And so I don't know if you know anything about that or whatever, but last conversation we had some time ago was he thought it was close to coming to reality, but I haven't seen anything play out. So Mike, do you have any knowledge on that?
No, but I just take a note because I think that's a really good idea, is to sort of, invent a cheat sheet card for dispatchers so they can sort of handle, or at least be able to address correctly what that operation is. And we'll get in that probably a little bit later, but talking about, what you can do to make sure people know that you're a legit operator. But go ahead, Charles.
That I was just saying the same thing, is that have the resources available so that you can educate the person you're working with. Maybe it's even good to get some of that information. And if you try to meet with the police department, and usually it's going to be more police than it is anybody else as far as public safety, because it's their job to enforce the laws. You're probably going to have, this is just me guessing, but you're probably going to have less problems with a department that has a drone program than you are with one without, because they understand the drone regulations more than others, and are going to have an understanding of the national airspace and the regulations, whereas a department who has no knowledge of drones is really going to be coming at it from a situation where they're not going to have this information about how do I deal with drone incursions or concerns. So that's my suggestion, is where you can create the conversations in advance. And in this case, I know that we had conversations with the large news media organization you were talking about, and they went to meet with the police in advance, and then they said no. That's where the rubber hits the road of trying to get the FAA, FSDO, and some others involved to help resolve that situation. The problem is that in some cases you may not have the time to do the news story you're trying to accomplish, because it's happening as we speak. So.
Yeah.
And I've got Paul Winmer says that he's a police dispatcher, and he said officers turn to him for drone info because they know he has the information. So again, I think that's a resource we're overlooking that can help probably resolve a lot of these calls that come in. And I'll stop there.
One of the things that, we recommend, again, it's that two-way street, is for news organizations and individual journalists, if you're going to be flying a drone, and obviously we're talking about somebody that's operating legally, Part 107, registered in airspace where they're authorized, that you just don't go do it, that you have a high visibility vest, and that it's got something written on it like drone operator WABC. So if you don't have a situation where you've let somebody know ahead of time, at least, when an officer gets out of their car and is approaching, it's not like, what do I got here? That at least they're getting some visual information, like, here's a guy, clearly he doesn't mind showing that he's there. He's got a high visibility vest. I can read the back. Oh, it's our local television station. It puts you in a whole lot better frame of mind than walking up to somebody going, who the hell is this? And do I need to be worried? As opposed to, obviously you need to approach with caution, but the more information that's nonverbal that you can provide ahead of time, the better off you're going to be when you're out there. Mike?
Yeah, we sort of encourage people who are doing, operations, whether it's a realtor or the media or whoever, is to make, to wear an orange vest or yellow vest or whatever color that says you're a UAS operator, but also to print out, and have these door hangers that basically says, hey, we're ABC News. We're filming, whatever, a story. If you have questions about our operation, please call us at this telephone number, and hang them on the doors around the area where you're operating. And that should resolve about 99% of your problems, because typically what happens is Mike O'Shea looks out his window, sees someone flying a drone over my neighbor's house, and then I call 911 to say, hey, there's a drone that's flying over this house. But if someone's already put a hanger on my door, I can pick that up and go, oh, ABC or NBC or whoever is operating a drone next door, for whatever reason. Or if it's a local realtor company that's doing it, or whoever, by doing that, they're taking that, they're letting people know what they're doing, and they're providing a contact if people have a question or concern, and if you're on the business side of this, you're also providing your information. So when they want their house filmed, because they're going to sell it or something, then you're kind of advertising your business. But I think it's important, just like you said, that we kind of let people know what it is, prevent that call that goes to 911 to start with, and then that reduces your contact with police. Plus, you can also turn around and give that card to police, that door hanger that explains who you are, that has your contact information on it. Because really, in public safety, I'm just checking to see who you are and what you're doing. And if you're giving me that information off the right off the bat, it's pretty much, it's a quick tell for me that it's probably a legit thing, that I don't really have to get into too much detail with. I may run the name to make sure you're not wanted for something really bad, but that's what I would do. Somebody posted in the chat, I was flipping through the chat real quick, that there is a statute about interfering with a flight crew. It's interfering with a flight crew that's on board an aircraft. So it doesn't cover unmanned aircraft systems, unfortunately. And we've looked at this a million different ways. And there's actually been some discussion of developing some rule making that may change the rule to actually say would cover the operators of an unmanned aircraft system. It doesn't, unfortunately. But still, if you harass somebody or scare somebody that causes them to crash the drone, you're more than likely going to be liable for your action.
And there's a couple other things that have popped up in the chat too. Jennifer Yoxall, who's an attorney, she's been really proactive, to said, you also might ask the question of them, would they mind running it by their city attorney or their legal counsel on what you're planning on doing, because you think that maybe what they're proposing of stopping you is illegal. And then there's another good remark that just came up here that said, one, look professional, act professional, know the laws, and then I guess the pun is intended here, don't cop an attitude, which again, the approach is probably 99% of it, as is indicated here. But again, have the materials, have the information, and be armed with information. And like Mike said, have that information that you can hand off, because it also gives a police officer an easy reporting process. So he's got the information to put in his report, his or her report, as to what was done and who the people were. So if it ever comes back, again, make his or her job easier as a police officer, and your life is probably going to be a lot easier too.
And I've told the people this before, but if Mike O'Shea was out taking photos for a real estate company or for a news media gathering organization, I think I would print out all my information. I'm Mike O'Shea. This is my home address. This is my Maryland driver's license number. This is my telephone number. Blah blah blah. And this is my remote pilot certificate number. This is my registration. I would put that all on a sheet of paper, make lots of copies of that, and then I would just tape it to the top of my box that I keep my drone in. And when public safety shows up, if I'm still flying, I would point to that and let them know, hey, you can take that. That has all my information stuff. And for me as a public safety officer, when I was approaching somebody who gave me all their information like that, just like you said, Charles, gives me information for, writing my report, whether it's a miscellaneous report, or I'm actually taking some kind of I'm writing a case report. But it's important that you provide that information so that it makes it easy for public safety. And you said you need to not cop an attitude with public safety, but it's the same with public safety. We need to be very careful that, our action when we deal with these people, and I always had the philosophy, I always treated people decently, not as a cop, not because they were decent, because I was decent. And that's how I always worked as a police officer. Plus, I'm not a very big guy, so I never went looking for a fight or looking to harass anybody. And because of that, I rarely got involved in altercations. But make the approach politely. Go up and say, hey, I'm Officer O'Shea with whatever Sheriff's Department. We got a report that about you operating the drone here. When you get a chance, if you can land, so we can talk about what you're doing here, and then just wait for him to land. I mean, if the guy, gets scared or tells you to pound sand, then you probably need to take further action. But, the professional operators are going to say, sure, hold on 1 second. Take me a minute to get it back on the ground. And then I'll be happy to deal with you or talk with you. It's the people that are either the careless, clueless, or criminal, the three C's, that are going to require further action.
Yeah, we have
And
the four
obviously,
Cs now. We have the curious.
the curious.
That's the ones that want to fly into the stadiums and are like, what's in here?
So, Mike, I couldn't agree with you more. And I just think that it's, that flip side of that is it's so important also in approaching someone as public safety to have at least a little bit of knowledge. It's great if somebody's got all that information there. Obviously, it changes the tone of things. But to also understand that where normally law enforcement is expecting immediate compliance, that when you're flying a drone, it doesn't, depending on where it is, it's not going to be there and you can't just stop what you're doing. And, I often doing that training, and Charles has seen it, there was a guy flying in London outside of Heathrow, and he was actually flying for the airport. This is for a few years ago. And there's this great picture of two bobbies trying to wrestle the controls out of his hands while he's flying, and he knows exactly what he's doing, rather than wait for him to land and have that decency, as opposed to, we're used to, when we say pull over, that means pull over now. But when you're approaching somebody that's flying a drone, you got to have the patience to, if they're in compliance, yeah, absolutely. Let me, especially if you don't have a visual observer, to have a conversation with the officer. If somebody's being compliant, give them that breathing space to land the drone safely, as opposed to just taking more action.
And
Mike,
I think
know
that's
there
a
was,
pretty good. Go ahead, Charles.
I was going to say, I know there was a discussion about creating a video about knowing your authority and giving some guidance. Is that still moving forward, or is that?
So we have a video that Scott Harris from LEAP already did, basically about knowing your authority. That's from a couple of years ago. But what we're trying to do is sort of update that and come up with, and really Mike O'Shea's vision. And of course, Mike O'Shea has lots of visions, but good or bad. But my vision is we do sort of two videos. We do one video about how public safety approaches, drone operators. And then we have another video for drone operators on how they interact with public safety when they're approached by public safety. I mean, those are the two different sides of the coin that I think that we should be able to work with and get that information out to people. But there is an older video that we did through the LEAP program that's available online. But like I said, I think it's time, because of some of the incidents that have popped up and some of the changes in the rules and regulations. It's probably time to update all that information. And Mickey, I sort of liked your analogy about the traffic stop. And I think public safety should look at it in terms of, if you turn on your lights on a car, you're not expecting him to stop right in the middle of the highway. He's gonna pull to the right side of the road and stop and put the car in park, and then you're gonna deal with him, and you're gonna pull up behind and put your car in park. You're not gonna take action right away. And that's all you're asking that person to do, is basically to, hey, land your drone, park, pull to the side of the road and stop so I can make contact with you. But you want to do it polite, because that's what we do. Remember, it's not because people are decent, but because we're decent that we take our.
I wanted to add, before you go into something else, Mickey, I wanted to add on that information that you provide to the officers that come up. The more information that you provide about what you're doing, that you're flying in Class G airspace, and some of those things will make you sound more credible, because you've done your homework, and I think it's gonna position the person immediately, again, not with an attitude, but saying, look, we've done our research for Class G airspace, it's legal to fly. The more of that information that you have, I think the more reception, a more positive reception you're going to have from law enforcement. That's just me. At least I would.
I totally agree. Unfortunately, we've had these incidents of they don't want to hear about anything. It's just like, I'm here, I'm the authority, I don't care. I don't even know what a Class G is in airspace. You just picked the letter, and I'm not interested. And, whether it's on the ground or in the air, I often tell when I do training with journalists, like, I know my rights. Saying I know my rights, or expressing how they know their rights in the law, is oftentimes the last sentence they utter before hearing, turn around, put your hands behind your back, you're under arrest, which is unfortunate. But, so So I think, yeah, hopefully you're able to chill the situation by having all that information there, by everybody talking calmly. Unfortunately, as we all well know, it doesn't always go the way we plan. But going back to what Mike said, him having visions, I saw that new video. It just kind of hit me as like literally shot from both point of view. Like you're the drone operator and all you see is the officer and hearing the questions. And then the other one is from the point of view, of watching the officer, so you could almost do it with two cameras shot at the same time. And then it's kind of two different things and everybody gets to see the other person's point of view. And I think it
Boy, if
worked
only
well.
we knew somebody who is a photojournalist.
If only. So Charles, I know, that we could all drone on for a while, but having been on these calls, I know and I'm not seeing the chat, so I could be wrong, but you almost never get to all the questions because we run out of time. So I don't know if this might be time-wise, where are we? Should we start are there questions? I know a lot of people have put in statements, but is there anything that there's a question that we could address?
And
Yeah, there's a
before
couple
you get
questions
there,
that-
one
Yeah, go
last point I wanted to make real quick, and I think Mickey talked about this a little bit, but it behooves you now to have that conversation with your local media. And it behooves local media to have that conversation with public safety in their area. I know where I was at. I was not in a huge city where we had about 150,000 people, but we had different media. We had, the TV stations and we had print media. And you pretty much got to know who was who because they show up at your traffic accidents, they show up at your murder scenes. And the nice thing is if you build that relationship with them, they provided us stuff that we didn't have sometimes. They provided us with pictures, they provided us with video, and they were a great resource to us for things that we didn't have. And we sort of did that vice versa. And I know where I live now in the Baltimore, DC region, most of the people that are flying for the media, sorry, my dogs decide to come visit, are off-duty public safety folks. I mean, they're typically, cops that fly helicopters for their agency and now are flying helicopters for the news media, and they've sort of evolved now to do unmanned aircraft systems. But like I said, if you haven't met with your media, even if they're operating legally, you want to start talking about how you deconflict airspace. If you're both flying at the same place, where are they going to fly? Where are you going to be flying so that you deconflict? And most people I haven't talked to anybody who said they've reached out to the local media and got sort of a cold shoulder. It was always very positive. And I know I do a lot of talking with Tom Madigan, who's assistant sheriff with Alameda County Sheriff's Department. And Tom said, yeah, our media is great. We sat and talked with them. We showed them what we can do. They get pictures sometimes that are better than ours and they let us use them. We have that great of a relationship and we've discussed, how do we talk to each other to make sure that they can get the pictures they want, we get the pictures we want, and to me, that's the perfect way that this should work. I mean, you should have a really good positive relationship. Remember, policing is a contract between you and the public you serve. So, and they're part of that public. So you want to build that contract with them and provide good service for them as well. And now I'm off my bandwagon.
Just talk about deconflicting. We've had conversations, obviously, amongst ourselves, because just like when there's 3 news helicopters up from the 3, networks or stations or whatever, they have to coordinate. The same thing's going to happen with drones. And we've talked about how you apportion the airspace. And okay, I'm here first. I'm going to be in this quadrant at this altitude. Will be, so again, it's not a free for all. The problem is that we've seen is when everybody knows who everybody is, the law enforcement knows, public safety knows, the media knows, and then what was that? Somebody decides who was one of the C's to launch their drone and nobody knows whose it is. And then all of a sudden it's like, all right, everybody's going to suffer for that. And I think that's one of the unfortunate things, but having conversations ahead of time and say, all right, what do we do in a situation like that? Rather than everybody have to, all right, land and do whatever, is have a plan. for dealing with that, because you know it's going to happen no matter how well you plan things out. And just like, media goes into a pool situation where, there's only going to be one camera because there's not enough room and everybody shares. It's going to be the same thing here. Sometimes there'll be an opportunity for everybody to fly. Sometimes there won't. And how does that going to work? The last thing law enforcement wants is to watch the media bickering amongst themselves about, I was here first. That, you want to all get along with each other and show that professionalism. So we're out there, we're presenting that face of, we want to be good stakeholders as part of this and cooperate, and we're all in this together.
So Mickey, I think there's an opportunity here that maybe we, drone responders and NPPA and the FAA could work together to put maybe some kind of overview document that could be distributed to the media and to public safety. And I like that idea of some kind of guide for the dispatchers that gives a kind of a checklist or rundown that helps them, because they can resolve some of these issues up front where a police officer doesn't even have to come to a scene. If some of those answers are already made. And I'm going to reach out to John Abbey and see, what he is with that program. So I think he was supposed to get a grant or something that this would all be automated. Plus it would collect the information to show what kind of receipts and reports were coming in and how were they resolved? Were they a problem? Were they not a problem? That kind of thing. So I think that our idea of having a public safety media kind of document or guidance document would be good. And then if we can look at those videos, I think the videos would be great to continue forward on, Mike, if we can help, reinforce getting that going forward with those 2 points of view.
Sure.
I think those 2 points of view in a single video are important for both police and for the media and other people that would be flying in that space, because it does give you both perspectives. And the other part, you said this earlier, oftentimes these police officers don't realize that by apprehending the person or trying to take the controller away actually creates a more dangerous situation than exists without their interaction. So that's another piece that we need to add as far as education.
No, totally agree.
And then I've got so we do have some questions here. Some of them are related to the media side of it. Some of them are totally different. But one question came up from John Gay, says, how should freelancers approach public safety? Will be media one day and commercial another. So I'll throw that out there.
I think they should approach them in the same way. Again, open conversation. This is what I do. I'm a freelancer. I have a Part 107. I'm doing freelance for local news, but I also supplement my income by shooting real estate, whatever. I mean, just be honest. This is what I do. What can I do to help you? So if you get a call, it's me. Do you want me to let you know ahead of time? Obviously, there are going to be situations, and we know this from dealing with the whole idea of remote ID. There are going to be situations, and why, as Mike has explained, that there were certain identifying numbers that didn't actually go directly back to who was operating the drone. What were they, system or
Session ID.
Session IDs, right. So there will be situations where you're not gonna tell ahead of time because you're doing some investigative piece. But for the most part, these days, you can, whether it's an independent journalist, a news organization, reach out, have had a long conversation in general about drone operations, and then say whatever your best practices are going to be. Hey, we'll call your dispatch, we'll let them know, a half an hour before where we're going to be, how long we're going to be there, that kind of thing. And that, I think, is true whether you're doing it, as Mike said, whether it's real estate or news gathering or some other commercial purpose. It's always good to let people know ahead of time if there's nothing you're trying to hide.
Well, I think freelance is one thing. I think all the other remote pilots, I think if every remote pilot ended up going to the police departments, saying I'm Part 107, I do commercial, I do real estate, I do bridge inspection, they're going to come after us and say, what did you tell those people to do? Mm-hmm. So I would say more from a freelance reporting situation, it would be good to have interactions. The others of you that Part 107 is doing commercial stuff, don't go to police departments and tell them you're doing that. Because I wanted to add, that by going in there early and in advance, you're also going to find out kind of the position of the police department or the law enforcement agency in advance. So there might be some education that needs to follow that you're not going to resolve in your meeting, but it could be that, again, that reach out to Mike to where he can reach out to Fizdo and the others that can actually go in and have a conversation and share and try to help resolve that situation in advance. So other questions, these are not necessarily that, but just to make sure we cover all the questions. First one is FAA controls national airspace, but some state legislatures have passed legislation outlawing drone photography of critical infrastructure, including cattle farms. Can I ignore such state laws as long as there is no FAA flight restriction in the area? Mike?
All I can tell you is you won't be violating any FAA rule or regulation as long as you're, but what happens in the state, that's called preemption, where they try to preempt federal law. That's something you will probably want to discuss with your attorney. It's, holding up a piece of paper saying, hey, this is preemption, is not going to prevent handcuffs from going on you or for someone from charging you for a crime. If you've got lots of money and you're an attorney or you have a team of attorneys to support you, then maybe you'll have a different attitude, but you probably need to, and some of these will eventually, I'm sure, come to head in a court of law. But right now, all I can tell you is you're not, if you're flying legally under the FAA regulations, then you're legal as far as the FAA is concerned.
Yeah, and that's the problem, we've seen is that the law is always catching up with technology, whether it involve automobiles or trains or whatever. The problem that we have these days is that technology is moving at this exponential rate, as we've seen. And unfortunately, the law is probably moving more at a glacial speed. So eventually it'll catch up. But, you were saying, if you got enough money in Singer, Dr. Singer challenged that law in Newton, Massachusetts, and said, no, you went a little too far. And the federal court agreed. NPPA is in the process of challenging a Texas statute in terms of regulations that pertain to drones and news gathering. So there's going to be a lot of case law out there that nobody is going to be able to figure out. And not to mention the whole privacy issue, which is both something that the media and public safety have to deal with, because where does that right of privacy start and end? And that's the whole question of what, on the ground, we know what a public forum is. It's a sidewalk, it's a park, that's a traditional public forum, but where does that start in the air and where does that end? And nobody really has a clear answer. And we've seen a number of agencies trying to address it. The Uniform Law Commission tried to have a drone tort law that addressed property rights. The American Law Institute's doing it. They're just, it's really going to take a while. And I don't know if we'll see that in our lifetime, but it's going to develop.
Well, Mickey, you bring up another point that's important for news media or news gathering folks that are on this particular webinar. The localities in the states can regulate landing and takeoff positions. So it is important that they understand that can happen, to where you may be in a park that they've put an ordinance in place that says you can't launch or land a drone here. So that's another aspect from the media perspective that they need to know, that the law enforcement may know that they may not know.
Yeah, like all federal parks pretty much prohibit drones, at least
unless you get a permit or permission. Yeah. So another question we have here is, if your agency is conducting UAS ops at a fire controlled airspace, does Lance automatically deny access to civilian 107 operation request in that same area? Mike?
I didn't understand the question.
It says they're conducting UAS ops at the fire controlled airspace. Does Lance deny civilian 107 operation request in that area? And it wouldn't know about those situations.
No, so the prohibitions would occur is if there's a temporary flight restriction, that should show up in Lance, because that's an FAA issued event. But if you have a wildfire, even though that's prohibited from federal law from flying a drone there, we may not know, especially if there wasn't a TFR issued. So the answer is, I don't know. I don't know where they're going with the question, but But if there's a TFR, you can't fly there. If it's a wildfire, they're not allowed to fly there either.
Well, I think what you're starting to see happen is some of the different platforms are putting in the ability for localities to put notifications in, like Virginia's doing the Virginia Fix, the Flight Information Exchange, but it's a notification. It's not tied to LANCE. It doesn't change the authorization of the flight in the airspace. It's just informative. So, so next question is, I took and passed the ALC 677 recurrent training and test course longer than 24 months after I got my Part 107. Do I need to take the general knowledge test again in person?
If you have a remote pilot certificate, the plastic card, even if you're had lapsed, if you take the 677, that will make you current again.
Okay, let's see what else I got here. Anything else? Hold on, I'm just kind of scrolling down stuff we haven't covered. Let's see. Where can we download a copy of the information that can be shared with local police to create a positive relationship regarding illegal drone operations?
Sure. If you go to FAA.gov/UAS, there's a pay on the left-hand call-up. There's a section that says government and public safety. If you click on that, it'll take, and then you again on that left side, there's a thing that says public safety toolkit, and then all that information is available there. It's got a really long web page, so I always just tell people to click on the link there. And the other thing I was going to tell people is we've had people call us saying, "Hey, can we have a TFR to keep the media out? Temporary flight restriction." And you should know a temporary flight restriction is issued to protect the safety of the airspace. It's not necessarily to protect the people on the ground, unless it's from falling debris or something. And you should know that the first people we will allow in a TFR is the media. We do never deny the people's First Amendment rights to gather the news. And so, we've had people say, "Well, we got TFR, but you let the media in." We're like, absolutely. We will always let the media in. And the other thing is we've had calls and I got one probably 2 weeks ago, and I can't believe I'm still getting these calls, but somebody wanted to complain about a news media helicopter interfering with their public safety UAS operation. And I had to remind him that public safety or UAS have to yield to manned aircraft. So they were in the wrong, not the news media helicopter. And they were like, "No, that can't be right." It's absolutely right. You took the test, you know that you have to yield to all manned aircraft, and that includes news media helicopters.
Let's see. One, is there a particular state or locality that has an effective set of ordinances or statutes that might serve as a model for appropriately addressing drone operations across all the different uses that you've referenced?
So I don't know for sure. I know in Maryland, we have in our transportation section, we have something that says the unsafe operation of an aircraft. Whether or not that your local, prosecutor would take that statute and use that as an enforcement thing for people who are, flying over, people or flying beyond visual line of sight, that kind of stuff is really something you need to have a discussion with them on. I'm kind of curious to see what happens, whether or not people adopt sort of, that with that's kind of a statute with examples of things you can't do under 107 as, unsafe operation. But I haven't heard of anything specifically, no.
Okay, can you clarify the rules for flying at night?
Yes, if you had a waiver to fly at night, that waiver expired on May 16th. On May 17th, you had to have taken the recurrent training, the ALC 677, or have taken the initial testing at a test site. With that part of that training or that testing comes information about how you can operate safely at night. You have to have, when you operate at night, your lighting has to be visible from the anti-collision lights have to be visible from 3 statute miles. And that's not for you, it's for other aircraft to see. You have to ensure those lights are operational prior to takeoff. And then you have to, part of the training that you get talks about the physiological effects of operations at night. And there was some article I just read that somebody did. Is it Steve Rose from Wake Forest? Did something about they were trying to see how far they could see a drone out at a distance and whether or not they could determine whether they could control it and deconflict from other traffic. And it was just sort of it wasn't, highly scientific, but it was a really good point about that. When you fly at night, you're going to be flying a lot closer than you think. It's not a matter of you seeing the flashing lights on your drone. It's a matter of whether or not you can adequately control that drone, know its position, know how to deconflict from other manned aircraft.
Or other obstacles. When we fly for a government agency, Phil Owen says, federal, state, local, we always require them to provide a representative that will handle any civilian or other government agency issues and require operators to record all flights and maintain copy for 90 days. That's been helpful on occasion. Jennifer Yoxall wanted to clarify a little bit, saying she's not suggesting that you ask a law enforcement officer to consult the city attorney. She's saying if you're going in advance and you run into resistance, then suggest it. She doesn't want you to push the police officer at that point to create kind of a, do I need to register to FAA that I am with the media? I have a personal Part 107.
No, that's not our business. And there were some issues when we did the remote ID rule, that there were some comments from media that were concerned that by broadcasting their serial number that they may be highlighted or picked on because they are the media. In reality, I think it's sort of going to be the opposite. I think if you're working with your local public safety, you can say, hey, if you see this serial number or somebody reports this serial number flying, this belongs to XYZ News. And I think that'll actually benefit you, I think. In cases where people take action because you are the media, and that's something that has to be dealt on a different level than Mike O'Shea's. Has to be dealt on Mickey's level.
One last question for media: is a still in place TFR has been lifted for media? How do they, the media and other freelance media, know this? How can they find out?
So it doesn't get lifted for the media specifically. We allow that they make a request to the Systems Operations Support Center. They say, hey, there's a natural disaster. We want to get photos in there. So basically, our Systems Operations Support Center is going to work with whoever the air boss or the people controlling the space on the ground there to allow the media in and to make sure that they deconflict the media from water drops or rescues and that kind of stuff. And obviously, the media doesn't want to get in the way of preventing that anyway, or they shouldn't. But they want to be in a place where they can probably get pictures of it. So that's sort of what the job of the Systems Operations Support Center is, to make that connection, to allow those flights.
We have a new stadium in our city opening July. What are the chances of getting a waiver authorization to fly despite the usual TFR? My plan would be to fly a few hundred feet away from the stadium to show it in context of the city skyline, no flying over the stadium itself or over people.
I'd have to know the specific example. I mean, they want to fly with people in the stadium. And then I'd have to know why. I mean, is there a reason that we would want to grant a waiver for that because there's a public interest in doing so?
Yeah, in other words, is it just you're taking it for marketing, your own personal selling of it versus some other need? Okay, that's done. Okay, that looks like that is all the questions for today. I do have to do one shout out. I was looking here online and I saw our number increase on the map, and I got to do a shout out to Leon DuPont from Forsyth County Fire Department for putting theirs on the map while we were in session today. So Leon, good on you. And the rest of you, okay, you still got time. I may call you out if we have time, but please do it if you get a chance.
So everybody here has a little homework to do. The homework is you need to make contact with your media to build that relationship. And then if you're the media, it's probably good to do the vice versa. And then also let people know if they don't know what the rules are, and you do, provide the education. I mean, we're always looking at public safety for in-service training, and it'd be great to have somebody come in and says, hey, I'm a news photographer. This is how we operate. This is how we run a drone. These are how we keep our operations legal. And here's how we can also support you. We're taking pictures of the scene. There might be something that interests you too. So, we could be partners in this thing. That's your homework.
And for us, I think we'll take action to see what we can do to produce some materials for educating everybody all the way around, and maybe some materials even for dispatchers to go on. So we'll follow up from that. So Mike, as usual, thanks for facilitation of today's session.
No problem.
And,
Thanks, Mickey.
And Mickey,
Thank
thanks
you.
for bringing
Thank
this
you
up
both.
and bringing
Yeah,
things to the forefront. Let's make
great.
things happen.
Thank you. Great.
Great. That ends today's session. So everybody take care. We'll see you at the next session, which will not be until August, because Mike O'Shea is going to be on a boat somewhere with his drone.
In the British Virgin Islands.
All right. So send us some pictures, some drone videos.
I'll bring some video back and pictures to show it the next time we do this in August.
Sounds good. Thanks everyone for participating. Mickey, Mike, thanks.